All right, we're gonna try another Mr. Nobody video. I thought we'd take a look at capitalism today to see if the United States is actually practicing capitalism. Actually, what I wanna see is if we can prove or disprove that Congress is practicing capitalism. Mitch and Nancy are Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi. For most of my adult life, Mitch and Nancy have been in charge of Congress, and they have governed hundreds of millions of dollars into their own bank accounts. So I want to look at the rate at which our stuff ends up in their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts and compare that rate to every other group of 535 Americans. If the money in their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts could not have ended up in these particular 535 people bank accounts as a matter of probability, the math will say so. And that would mean that Mitch and Nancy intentionally governed our stuff into their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts. Intentional wealth accumulation is stealing. That's not capitalism. This is a process called intentional probability hacking. The designers of the system would be getting into the system they design intentionally. This really isn't very complicated. There's 330 million of us and 535 of them. If we want to know how many ways there are to make all the groups of 535 Americans, we just want to combine those two numbers, 330 million and 535. And once we know how many ways there are to make all the groups of 535 Americans, well, then we can compare the rate at which our stuff ends up in their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts and compare that to all the regular people groups. If the chances are the same for each group, not the amount, if everybody gets the same amount, that's socialism. We're not looking for that. We're looking for the probabilities that we all get a fair chance at getting our stuff. If they're governing our chances at themselves, then we're not getting our fair chance. So if Mitch and Nancy are intentionally governing our stuff with themselves, they're not practicing capitalism since it's the same money pie for all the other groups. That would disprove capitalism in America. So that's all we're trying to do. Find out how many ways there are to make all the groups of 535 Americans in unordered sets, combinations. 330 million choose 535 equals X, the number of groups. This is the odds that the Mitch and Nancy group could accidentally govern our stuff with themselves once. This is not a small number. If this was like 4, if there were 4 groups, yeah, Mitch and Nancy could sit down at a blackjack table with 4 other groups and win. That would make perfect sense, but this number isn't 4. Now, I'm not a teacher, so I didn't teach these classes. I don't really know how to explain how big a number is. 330 million choose 535 is a fairly big number. It's like all the atoms in the universe. Well, in math, it's 330 million factorial times 535 factorial over 535 factorial times 330 million minus 535 factorial equals 330 million, choose 535 equals X. The odds Mitch and Nancy could govern our stuff with themselves once. This number, they say, is capitalism, and they published us a function of X, but the yield is into their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts at like a 0.96 rate. That looks like intentional wealth accumulation. That is not capitalism, that's stealing. The math part of this is fairly simple, as you can see. It's not rocket science. The people in the math department, that's MIT, Caltech, I studied this stuff at Polytech Night School, Neil deGrasse Tyson and this actress, Winnie from the Wonder Years, Danica something, he's been making videos about singing and dancing and other things. She's making cooking videos. The purpose of the information class is to protect the 330 million of us from the 535 of them. MIT, Caltech, Polytech, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Winnie from the Wonder Years, and the rest of them need to stop what they're doing. They need to pick up a pencil and they need to count for their country, or they need to leave all of their money here and move to Moscow. Somebody needs to pick up a pencil and count, because I'm pretty sure that Mitch and Nancy are intentionally governing our stuff with themselves and we can stop them. That pretty much ends the math department part of this video. The rest of this stuff is going to be political science and how this stuff comes together. If that kind of stuff bores you, then feel free to stop listening now. 535 people. These people, Mitch and Nancy, publish every single word we live under. These words describe every single system we live under. The gun system, the God system, the education system, war system, money, oil, all of it. These words describe each system, its structure, its foundation, and how all of our stuff moves right into their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts. The purpose of the words was supposed to be us, not the state. If they're governing for the state, and Mitch and Nancy are the state, and their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts are state bank accounts, they are supposed to be governing for us. The purpose of government in America is this sentence: the allocation of resources to govern for the public, not the state, for the public health, safety, and morals. Well, we have a little problem. We got more health and safety stuff under our feet than anybody ever had in the history of health, safety, stuff, or feet. And these 535 people keep governing it themselves. We can't do both. We can't govern for the state and for the public. We had to pick, and Mitch and Nancy chose Mitch and Nancy. Not only do we have more health and safety stuff under our feet, we have more maths to get at more stuff. Even if Moldova had what we had, we still got more. You'll notice that we have the least amount of health and safety in American history. Mitch, Nancy, and Chuck, Trump and Joe, and Chief Justice Roberts are our COVID administration, these last two administrations. They have, on the wealthiest land ever, governed the United States into the least amount of health and safety ever. They have governed us into the most amount of American dead doctors, the most amount of American dead nurses, the most amount of American dead cab drivers, truck drivers, meat workers, and teachers. They've governed us into the most of our freeways are falling down. The most of our trains are falling down. That's what our money's for, not their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts. They governed us into the most of our forests were on fire. The most of our cities were on fire. The most of the jobs were gone. The most of the money was gone. The most of the food was gone. The most of the time was gone. They shamed us with food lines on the wealthiest land ever. The last guy signed porn star fuck money checks off our Resolute desk. This family does lines off it. These people are immoral scumbags. They have governed us into the most amount of American mass graves. Mitch, Nancy, and Chuck, Trump and Joe, and Chief Justice Roberts have governed these United States into more misery, suffering, and loss, more grief and sorrow than Ho Chi Minh, Hitler, Stalin, and Mussolini combined, here at home, nowhere else, no disrespect to any time or place. The worst thing to have ever happened to these United States and our children and theirs are Mitch, Nancy, and Chuck. And I'm getting kind of tired of it. The Greeks designed these systems, a democratic republic practicing capitalism, a couple thousand years ago. These Greeks spent their lives contemplating humanity, how we participate with each other, and the stuff in the ground. They studied the entire known world, tens of thousands of square miles, hundreds of different types of us. They built classrooms out of stone, not wood. They studied teacher to student, life to death, generationally, how nature organized us into these natural, unordered system sets politically, religiously, economically, and socially. And without hardly any math at all, they turned that nest into discrete objects with system and structure and timeline. And these systems were designed to work and would work in Moldova if them poor people could stop getting robbed $1 billion at a time. Well, what happened, Mitch? What happened, Nancy? We got too much stuff. We had too much wood. We couldn't figure out how to house ourselves. We got too much food. We couldn't figure out how to nourish ourselves. Either Plato's a moron or we're getting robbed. And the only way to figure this stuff out is the math department. A republic is a form of government where the legislative branch is not responsible to the executive branch. Let's see what Mitch and Nancy did. There's the legislative branch, there's the executive branch, there's the judicial branch, and there's industry. This is where the money comes from. The legislative branch, Mitch and Nancy, sold each subsystem that we live under to its industry for money. That money, our health and safety stuff money, currently in their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts. They sold it to industry. They sold our gun system to the gun industry, our food system to the food industry, health to health, oil to oil, banks to banks, and so on. Industry's not gambling. Industry has been purchasing the ability to design that system, and that's how we live. Industry pays experts to gather some words. Then they pay Mitch and Nancy a lot of money to publish industry-written words at us. Mitch and Nancy didn't write the words, they sold the words for money. This made us industry governed under one system and miserable instead of easily and happily self-governed under two. What they did next ruined everything. The military came and Mitch and Nancy did the same thing. The cops came and they did the same thing. Educators, prisons, none of that is industry. All of that is the executive branch of government. So how we ended up living was the executive branch has been self-writing and self-designing its own war systems and war budgets, its own police systems and police budgets, education systems and prisons and other things. These are systems run amok on instinct, and you can see the results. All of them are complete failures. So the executive branch has been writing the words and then paying our legislative branch the biggest money, our tax dollars from last time, to publish executive branch written words of us. Then the executive has been signing executive branch written words into law. The executive branch has been writing the words and signing them into law. That consolidates the power of both branches underneath the executive branch. And that resolves this republic as a matter of political science. And you'll notice that we're not safe. The word republic keeps us safe. That's where checks and balances comes from. That's where separation of powers comes from. Our government works together in secret, not in public, separately. Jim Comey of the executive branch investigated Hillary Clinton of the legislative branch and found over 100 provable charges. He never said he didn't have a provable charge because he found 100 provable charges. He thought about the 330 million of us and he chose the state, the nation. That's nationalism. He wasn't supposed to do that. Jim Comey is to nationalism as Benedict Arnold is to treason. And you can bet your britches, never again will any reasonable prosecutor bring these charges unless they absolutely hate them and it doesn't matter. Mr. Santos has hurt like 3 people. Who cares? Mitch and Nancy are the criminals. They hurt all of us. And make no bones about it. No reasonable prosecutor is going to bring these charges. We need to count our way out of this mess. I would like to talk about this debt, the derivatives debt. Everybody's heard that we owe money. We owe $1.5 quadrillion. That is 15 zeros. That's $1 billion and a half. That is 1/5 the value of planet Earth. Somehow we owe who? Well, in 2,500 years of knowing how to count in earnest, about 200 groups of people have fashioned 200 countries, our world leaders. This group of leaders is a tiny speck of all the humans on Earth. And a subset of that are the Mitch and Nancys about the planet. And they get to live their lives knowing full well that every rock, every grain of sand, every blade of grass, and every creature gets born owing 1/5 of itself to the Mitch and Nancys. I think Mitch and Nancy can fuck right off. Mitch and Nancy do this by asserting individual rights at us. We're going to get back to that later. $1.5 quadrillion is a lot of money. This does not resolve like a mortgage in 20 or 30 years. Here's what I think happened. If I was going to make indentured servants out of everybody on Earth, about 150 years ago, I would derivatorize for, in contracts, the stuff your generation will dig up in the future after you get born. By pre-selling the stuff, I can pre-sell your labor at a discount. That would mean as each Mitch and Nancy come to acquire the Capitol building and they get the keys to the kingdom, they would already know how much their generation had to dig up and how much they were allowed to spend on us, rain, shine, or virus. They have a budget for us. We're the skim, they're the house, and they're stealing everything. The way out of this mess is to realize that Mitch and Nancy are not individuals. Mitch and Nancy each represent groups, and each are separate and apart from the other. Things that are groups and separate and apart from each other are called discrete objects. Mitch and Nancy take a group job in a group building and make group meetings at group industry that no individual can attend. No other group can attend. The executive branch cannot govern our stuff into their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts. The judicial branch cannot govern our stuff into their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts. The universities and the press is our information class. They can't do it, and we didn't do it. Mitch and Nancy go into our Capitol building and govern all of our stuff at themselves. We can't do both. We can't govern for the state and for the public. They had to pick, and they chose themselves. The only way out of this mess is us. No reasonable prosecutor is bringing any charges. If we don't count our way out of this mess using the actual math department, if we don't put these lawyer words down and count, your great-great-grandkids will be digging it up and Mitch and Nancy's spawn will be spending it. Mitch and Nancy are intentionally governing our stuff with themselves right now as you're listening to me. That's money for your kids and your health and your education. We are the sickest and brokest we have ever been because these people simply can't stop governing our stuff with themselves. We need to tell these people that we want them to come out of our Capitol building with their books up. Either they can show us their books or they need the individual right to remain silent. Individual rights are for individuals. The individual rights I'm thinking of are the right to remain silent, the right to an attorney, the right to a fair trial. Mitch and Nancy are not individuals. They take a group job in a group building and make group meetings at group industry. They steal group oil and group bank money, and then they assert individual rights about it. If you ask any system designer, MIT, Caltech, Polytech, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Winnie from the Wonder Years, would they design this system and allow these 535 groups, discrete objects, assert individual rights at the rest of us? The answer is absolutely not. This is just a bad system design. That's the solution. We need to get these people to understand that we don't believe them anymore. We don't think they accidentally capitalismed our accidental stuff into their accidental, probability-laden, fair chance. It was just their turn again. Nothing to do with the fact they published the words that what moved our stuff into their Mitch and Nancy bank accounts, Mitch and Nancy bank accounts. These people need to come out and show us their books. We need to let our Congress people and senators know that if they can show us their books, they need to hashtag I don't need my right to remain silent today and come out of our Capitol building and show us their books that 174,000 came in and 174,000 came out. It wouldn't surprise me if there were as little as 6 people in our Capitol building who could show us their books. The rest of them are caught. The executive branch didn't do it, the judicial branch didn't do it, and we didn't do it, and the universities didn't do it. Mitch and Nancy did it. If they can't show us their books, they need the right to remain silent about how they robbed us. So either Mitch and Nancy can show us their books or they're caught. That's checkmate. What were they supposed to be doing? They were supposed to be governing for our health and safety, and instead they governed for themselves. I say the math department needs to pick up a pencil. The 330 million of us need to stop yelling at each other. We're not mad at each other. We're mad at Mitch and Nancy. We need to have them come out of our building with their books up, and we need to count our way out of this mess. If we don't, Mitch and Nancy's great-grandkids will be digging it up, and Mitch and Nancy's spawn will be spending it. I meant your great-grandkids will be digging it up, and Mitch and Nancy's spawn will be spending it. Have a nice day.